I actually wrote my master's paper thesis, and the hypothesis of my paper was that online learning is bad for education. I wrote an entire paper on that. That was the premise of the paper. Then I did research on it and to find out if my premise was true. And what I found out was through the research, and I definitely have confirmed over the last 13 or 14 years that I've been working in online education, is that sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's true that online learning is significantly less educationally beneficial for a student. And sometimes it's absolutely exactly what they need. And when I did my research, the deciding variable or factor that most contributed one way or the other was how involved and how connected students are with their teachers.
Hello, and welcome to You Matter Here, our Minnesota Transitions Charter School podcast, where we elevate the voices of our people, dig deeper into our big ideas, and explore how we show up for ourselves and each other in order to make magic happen. I am your host, Wendy Lorelie, the Director of Equity and Diversity here at MTCS. My hope is that as we spend time together, we will have an opportunity to explore three key questions. Who am I? Who are we? And who are we to each other? As it is the intersection of these questions that informs the assumptions we make, drives our behavior, and impacts our relationships with ourselves and with others. Welcome back to You Matter Here, our Minnesota Transitions Charter School podcast. Today, I am joined by two special guests who are integral in the functioning of Minnesota Virtual Schools, one of our 7 programs within MTCS that has been around for over 20 years. Our episodes thus far have hopefully highlighted some of the many ways in which we aim to meet young people where they are and walk alongside them as they build dreams of their future. One of the ways we do this is by offering online schooling, and I have Bill Glenz and Lorelie from Minnesota Virtual Schools joining me in the studio today. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for the invite.
So Bill Glenz is the principal of Minnesota Virtual Schools and has been with MTCS for 23 years. He came to us as a social studies teacher, was the principal at MTS Secondary, and has been the principal for Minnesota Virtual Schools for the last 13 years. Lorelie Lorenz is the program coordinator of supplemental and part-time students and a student support specialist. We are celebrating 13 years of service with Lorelie this year. Again, I can't thank you both enough for being willing to just share parts of your story with us today so that we can get to know you a little bit more as individuals, as who you are, and certainly the gifts that you bring into our community. So this first question is really for both of you, and it's really about sort of how and why did you decide to join our MTCS community? So you talked a little bit about that, but if you could expand, that would be great. Bill.
I go first.
Yeah.
So originally I was part of MTCS as a teacher. I came here in 1999, actually, as a social studies teacher. I worked at our high school program, and it was relatively kind of a small program, and enjoyed that for a few years. And then eventually there was a opportunity. MTS split its high school from one program into 2, and there was a opportunity they need another administrator, so they asked me to interview, and I did, and moved into that role, and then been in various administrative type roles since then. I think it was about 2004 when I made that switch. And in terms of why I came here, I think I was really intrigued by the idea of charter school. Charter schools were relatively new to the state and to the country at that point. I was a teacher at traditional school. Eden Prairie High School was the last place I worked before I came here, and I really liked the idea of working with disadvantaged children, to be honest. That was something I'd done in various capacities before I was a teacher. I worked in residential treatment and a couple other places with youth, and I really liked that. I felt like I had a lot of passion for working with that student population. And so when the opportunity to teach students who needed a little bit of everything, I kind of resonated with me. And so I wanted to try it, and I've stuck with it ever since.
How about you, Lorelie?
So I was somewhere in between that. I came in when I started with MTS in 2013 is when I took over the supplemental program. I just loved the uniqueness of what it offers to students. I love the staff. I love the option of forever growing. What can we do better? What can we do more? And I've been doing that ever since 2013. And I have met and discovered lots of different reasons why this program is needed for many students.
Yeah, would you talk a little bit about that specifically? Sort of why do students choose to come to Minnesota Virtual Schools?
So some of the reasons, there's a lot of reasons. It's all the way from, the spectrum is huge. So we'll get students who want to try it out, and they're very successful, but there are also individual needs. I had a student, she had narcolepsy, and she was at school, and she, super awesome girl. She was struggling because she was always getting C's and D's. She knew her potential was bigger. Her parents decided to enroll her in the supplemental program. And as soon as she was able to let her body sleep the way she needed, all of a sudden she was getting A's and B's and then eventually A's. And she graduated. I mean, she was just elated. Her parents were elated. They were just so appreciative of the supplemental program. So the fact that she was able to still stay within her high school and graduate with her class if that's what they choose to do, but still have half of their classes taking online with us through the supplemental program, she was able to let those needs be met so that she could be her best academically.
Yeah, which sometimes requires just something totally different, right?
Completely
or
different.
Just a different schedule, different opportunities, different kinds of support, different spaces to be able to learn in. Could you talk a little bit about sort of how the supplemental type part-time program works? You mentioned a little bit being able to do some online and some in a high school or a school that they might already be attending?
Yes. So students will be physically attending their traditional brick and mortar school. They then have the choice to take 1, 2, or 3, depending on what their full load schedule is. They're able to take half of their classes with us online. So they can choose an elective, a core class. There's remedial, there's honors classes, there's specific, unique classes that will mold them into the career path that they're looking for. So there's a very broad range. Every class that we offer, they're also able to take with us.
Bill, could you talk a little bit more too about sort of especially as your time at virtual, and when you see sort of the needs of kids and why they're choosing to come to you or talking to the parents, have you seen, are there themes that sort of come up? Has that need really shifted over the span of time? I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions and maybe give you time to answer them.
Yeah. In terms of why students come and if that's changed, I mean, I think definitely the world of education never stops changing. And I think that when I first went to virtual, I should mention too, when I was a administrator and a teacher in a traditional schools, and I did my master's degree, actually, one of the things that I tell people is I actually wrote my master's paper thesis, and the hypothesis of my paper was that online learning is bad for education. I wrote an entire paper on that. That was the premise of the paper. Then I did research on it and to find out if my premise was true. And what I found out was through the research, and I definitely have confirmed over the last 13 or 14 years that I've been working in online education, is that sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's true that online learning is significantly less educationally beneficial for a student. and sometimes it's absolutely exactly what they need. And when I did my research, the deciding variable or factor that most contributed one way or the other was how involved and how connected students are with their teachers. Online programs that don't really have a lot of connection between teachers and students and just sort of are kind of independent study focused seem to be follow that pattern of not being I would describe as a less educational experience for students, and ones that really do emphasize connecting students and teachers and having a relationship where there's guided instruction as a part of students learning online. Then those tend to be really good and equivalent, if not better, experiences for students educationally. And so when I then transitioned over to working in an online school, one of the things that I tried to remember and maintain and pay attention to was how much do we build in connections and how much are we making sure that and our teachers are fully accessible to our students, and that there's an emphasis on making sure that students are supported in their learning through, even though it's online. And so it's finding the right connection where we give students flexibility, we give students choices, we give students, Laura talked a little bit earlier about how students sometimes just need that extra opportunity or flexibility or different way to access their courses, and that's definitely what we try to provide. But we don't want to forget that students, in particular middle and high school students, are not ready almost always. They're not ready to teach themselves, and so that's why we all have a role. That's why we all have jobs. That's why we create the positions we have and put people in the positions they're in, is to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support those students when they're working their way through their classes and learning. And so the more we develop our program over the course of the last, I would say, decade, is really just trying to build more and more layers on how we support students, how we offer supports, how we make sure that we're monitoring and giving feedback to parents and students and families, et cetera, so that we never feel like we're not giving them what they need. And of course, not everybody. We don't have 100% success in our courses for sure, and we definitely have times when we learn from mistakes that we make. But we always try to incorporate improvement and better processes as we move forward. And every year, I feel like we get a little closer to that end goal of making sure that every student has the support they need. So, I think that's. I'm always constantly challenged, I think, in the role that I'm in. I always feel like I'm getting an opportunity to really improve myself and help others improve and help our students improve, our staff, et cetera. So that's one thing that I really like about my role, and I think others as well and that work in our school is there's definitely a mindset of making sure that we're always asking ourselves what more can we do, and are we doing everything, and if not, how can we do a little better next time we do it. So I think that's what I see. I think that the feedback we get from our students and our families, a lot of our students, especially now, over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a lot of changes in people's exposure to online learning, particularly in K through 12. Almost every student has some exposure now, and they have a frame of reference. I think there was a time when most of our students that started our school, that was their first time ever having done anything online or online learning. So a lot of those students didn't really have any context for what is this good or not. But now I think a lot of the feedback we get is that, that we really try to look for and find and make sure is that we're providing, an experience that better suits their needs than what they've gotten at their previous thing. And again, it's not necessarily because we're doing that we're better. We just want to make sure that's a point of emphasis for our school and our program.
Yeah, I think your point about, again, we're always trying to sort of ask, like, how can we better meet the needs of our kids, and talking to the point that now kids, because of the pandemic, have experienced a lot of variations of what online learning looks like. Could you talk a little bit about just sort of why is Minnesota Virtual
unique when, especially in the land of a billion online programs that have sort of come out of the pandemic. Some have fizzled away, but some are still around, right? And so I think there is something to be said for an online program that has been around for 20 years, that this isn't our first shot at it. We've learned a lot along the way about how to provide that support, and specifically about that connection that you talk about, because I think that is a point of emphasis in all of our programs, right? Is that it's the connection that young people have with the adults that they are trying to learn with and around all the time, that really sort of makes or breaks what a kid's experience is at school, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the important parts, and we're not the only ones, but I do think that there's definitely subgroup of online programs that are really focused and try to build programming around the idea of putting enough resources into the program to meet the needs of students. And not, I think one of the mistakes, or one of the challenges that a lot of online learning, and as I said before, there's kind of two kinds of programs. There's online programs that are really designed as sort of independent study and just kind of, here's your classes, we'll see at the end of the semester kind of programs. And then there's others that kind of try to be more representative of a comprehensive experience for students. And I think the programs that really look at this as a school, like a full service school, a comprehensive approach to learning, are gonna do a better job of meeting those needs of those students, because they're just it's not an opportunity to be more efficient. Efficiency is, in my opinion, something. It's a slippery slope when it comes in online learning. I think because it's very easy to be incredibly efficient.
Totally. With
resources and time and energy and effort put into the programs. There's definitely curriculum providers and others that out there, and educational management organizations that will sell schools on a sort of turnkey solution, saying, hey, you don't have to do anything. We'll do everything. We'll take it from here. You just have to sort of sign the dotted line, and we'll do everything for you. And I think that's appealing, because I think it's very difficult to create online programming. It's very difficult to do a good job with really building out an entire system that's going to function and help kids learn when it's completely remote and online. That's just really hard to do. And the more you can sort of have this sort of strong foundation, I think that's appealing for schools and systems. And I think one of the benefits of being a charter, and by being this sort of, I think charters are often referred to and looked upon as sort of educational laboratories, and that we can sort of try stuff that's non-traditional and unconventional, because we're supposed to try to innovate. We're supposed to try to do things differently and try to solve some of the problems that are endemic in traditional learning or public school systems, and that gives us this sort of freedom to experiment a little bit and take some chances, and not necessarily chances with students, but just programmatically and financially, et cetera. And just how we staff and how we sort of allocate those resources. So I think if, the approach that we take is we try to look at building systems around student needs rather than building a system and then the students have to match their needs with what we offer. And I think the more we remember that that's the purpose for what we're doing is about students and whether or not it's working with students and it's promoting success, then I think we have the mindset that's going to lead us to meeting needs of students rather than just creating programming and then telling students, well, this is what we offer, so that hopefully it works for you. So I think that's, for me, I think that's one of the things that makes schools like ours different, is the idea that it's a student-centered approach to online learning. It's just a really, strangely enough, isn't as common as you think it might be.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the young people who come to Minnesota Virtual, and correct me if I'm wrong, but are kids that haven't necessarily always been seen, or struggling to find their place in their space in traditional schools or traditional time frames of like when schools, start and stop, but also the treatment of a lot of young people, right, in schools and social, the social dynamics. I know that we have young people who've experienced bullying, lots of different social anxieties. There's a lot of different reasons why young people are going to choose online programs to be connected. And I think that also then highlights the potential risk for an online program that isn't thinking about that point of connection and really being able to wrap around young people and understand what are your needs, who are you, and who do you want to be, and how do we really support you in becoming that here when you have the barriers of they're not in front of you every day, right? And I think especially, in talking to some of our social workers, that sort of point of context, being able to see young people kind of every day and get a sense of like, oh, that kid looks a little off today, I'm going to check in with them. You have some additional barriers to that, but I think you also have some intentional ways in which you're doing that. Is there anything that you wanted to kind of add or share, Lorelie, when you think about things as a student support specialist and what people are coming with?
Yeah. So especially when you touched on there are some barriers. However, it's almost sometimes the exact opposite, because when you talk to students, but I almost feel like it's a really unique entrance into getting to know them and helping them in what they need. I really look forward to it. Actually, I love getting to know one-on-one with students. Just a quick check-in, just someone letting them know like, hey, I'm watching and I'm looking at your progression and you're doing great, or is there something I can help you with? And then we get deeper. But that's one of the things that I absolutely love with being a support specialist is getting to know them, having, a conversation. It doesn't always have to be about school. Mm-hmm. I have a barrel racer. She's amazing. She's awesome. And we loved.
At first I was like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
A barrel racer.
Like
racing barrels?
Yeah. I ride horses. Bill, on the other hand, hates horses.
Okay.
Can't stand them.
I told him that
I've ever been in the presence of a horse hater before, but all right.
I was really excited. Off subject. I was really excited, and we were all kind of in a group at school. And he's, Bill's like, hey, we should do a staff introduction, just really get to know each other and just name a few things that you really like. And I was like, I love riding my horse. I love showing my horses. And he looked at me and he was like, yeah, no. No. And I was like, Bill, you have like some serious feelings about this. He was like, no.
Horse trauma?
I grew up on a farm. I took care of horses. It was my grandpa's farm, and we lived next door, so that turned into I was the worker on the farm. But yeah, I think they're not that interesting of an don't have any interest at all in horses. One thing I did want to add a little bit to that last question, and I think one of the interesting things about this sort of there's a barrier towards how normally we would have interactions with students and teachers, or staff and teachers, and a lot of times how you would sort of go about that thing. And I think there's this perception that it's harder, particularly for students, like they're just going to be lost or they're going to be really uncomfortable with sharing. And I think that is a mindset of people that are not of the current generation of students. I think that students in 2023 are very comfortable communicating with people not in person.
Yeah.
I think they're very, that's not a barrier for them to have very meaningful and deep relationships with people that they don't have any physical space connection with, that they never really are in person with. But there's also a challenge there, and I think it's the reality of a lot of things in our society right now, is that you have to be aware of and beware of curated content that people put out there that sort of mischaracterize what they're truly like, or what they're truly experiencing or struggling with. Is I think that people, there's a tendency, I think, for a lot of time, especially young people, to sort of put out in their best show, as to say like, hey, look, my life is amazing and awesome, and look, everything is just super curated in social media or profiles and web pages and things like that. And then, when you go to to the layer below that, you start to find that there's a whole lot that isn't great, but they just not necessarily putting that out there
Right.
for obvious reasons. And so I think there's definitely efforts to try to get past the sort of superficial kind of everything's cool, everything's fine, and I don't want to share anything stage with students, and get to that point where they're going to open up on the stuff that they wouldn't necessarily put out there for strangers or this public. So
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make, and similar to kind of what you were saying, Lorelie, in terms of, it's not harder, it's just different, right? And that it does provide a different opportunity to connect with young people when they feel freer to be themselves because they aren't worried about the social implications or the assumptions that the people that are there around or their teachers, right? Like there's so much, especially for young people in middle school, high school, that's so much of what they're thinking about and consumed about is what does everybody think about me, right? Like I understand myself based on how I think other people think of me, right?
Absolutely.
So I think, again, this online opportunity does give you a unique way for them to go a little bit deeper, right? To sort of see themselves and to view themselves in different ways, as well as, being able to be vulnerable in a different way that you don't get to do when you're in the hustle bustle necessarily of a brick and mortar school, but when you have a little bit more peace and quiet, maybe from where you are or where you're sitting and interacting with someone. I mean, you have all of these different modes of being able to communicate with young people that I think sometimes when you're in a brick and mortar setting, you feel a little bit more restricted, right? Like I can't necessarily be texting or having phone conversations all the time and what that is, but that becomes a really normalized way to communicate with young people and is a way of communication that they're way more familiar with and comfortable with, right? So again, just like another point of entrance of being able to access someone to be able to support them in their learning journey.
Well, I think that's one of the things that makes online learning different for students than maybe traditional learning is there's just so much more time in the day for those interactions. I mean, when I was teaching classes, I think you would think you're really investing a lot in a student's relationship if you talk to them for 5 minutes.
Right.
Kind of between classes, you got 5 minutes. Yep, let me talk you through. Or maybe as you're circling around the class and you're teaching, you might stop at a student's desk and talk through something they're struggling with for a few minutes. But it's incredibly common for students to interact with and get 30 minutes one-on-one with a staff member virtual to talk through a couple assignments or to just talk about a check-in or to see what their plans are for the week and make sure they've got a good schedule to get to stay on track or get caught up or whatever. So I think those interactions do tend to really kind of cement in those stronger relationships that otherwise would be pretty casual because you're just, it's really, 1 minute here, 2 minutes there, whatever, that is typically what you would. And it's actually one of the kind of awkwardness of starting an online school like ours is almost always students say, I don't want to bother anybody. Like nobody want, I need way more help than you can give me. I'm like, well, try, right?
Yeah,
Let's
right.
see.
We
Let's
are
see.
literally here for that.
Yes. And that's what teachers, they got a whole wide open calendar. So pick a spot, sign up for a time, get 30 minutes and you'll see how much way more progress than you could by trying to struggle through something or whatever. So I think getting the students to the point where they're comfortable with that, like Laura said, it's a progression a lot of times where students don't do it, but then when they do it once, they get more comfortable with it and it becomes more regular.
Anything that you would particularly say to a student or family that is really struggling right now with traditional brick and mortar schools? Anything that maybe we haven't highlighted or...
Yeah, I do. One of the things that's another thing that's different about us, I think, than others, and I think it's just because we kind of started from scratch and kind of worked from there, was the idea that my work phone, which is also my personal phone, is the phone number that's on the MDE website if you want to find out information about our school. So you don't need to go through a lot of layers. You can talk to me anytime you want. And people do. They call me fairly regularly and say, tell me about the school. And I'm calling a bunch of different schools. I want to find out information. And so, one of the advice I try to give people is, high school is really hard for some kids. And, oftentimes struggling means different things to different people. And but changing high schools, and particularly changing in kind of midstream, is it's very difficult to stay on track to graduate on time if you're switching. And so I do try to give people advice, the best advice I can, that sometimes the best thing to do is maybe try an online class, but not completely. So that's one of the things why our part-time program makes a lot of sense. You can essentially shares a student between a traditional school and an online school. So that's a good sort of dip your toe in the water feeling for families if they're not really sure. And not only the other benefit of that is you still get to be connected to your school with things like prom and sports and graduation and activities, and you still have connection with your friends and peer groups, etc. So you don't have to choose between those. If you need a flexible schedule but still want to keep those connections part-time, is oftentimes a good choice. So that's some advice I give. The other advice I give too is, look, if it's just a teacher that you hate, and that's just like making your day miserable, well, if you've, a lot of families like, look, we've tried working with this school and they're not helping us, and et cetera, then part-time's another good choice too. If it's the math teacher, we offer math. So maybe somebody switch the math, but keep everything else. You don't want to mess up your high school progression and all that just because there's a particular teacher that just is not working that relationship. But if it's a situation where it's just unbearable, and we definitely don't want students to feel like school is just the worst thing about their life, and there for some kids that is definitely the truth. Then they should try it, and we can call a couple different schools, try to make sure you ask the questions that you want. If you can't get a phone call or a response from those initial inquiries, then that's a sign, I think. Then that's a message there that you should think about and make sure that. I'm a parent, and I would want my kids' school to be responsive when I have a problem, and not necessarily say, look, that's not our problem, that kind of thing. And so if there's a school that's willing to meet with you and talk with you and walk you through the process, then I think that's a good start.
Yep.
And again, sometimes the best advice that I try to give people or parents and students is, if there's some way to salvage and make things work with your local school, switching isn't always the best choice, but sometimes it is. And so really try to talk through that, consider that, and get some advice from people either at the prospective online schools or maybe at your local school if there's counselors or whatever that, make sure you ask. That's people's job. That's what they do. That's their role is. And I think most people that work in public education really do care about kids. They want to help them be successful. They want to make sure they have a chance to graduate. So use the resources that are available, and then if you want to talk to somebody, I'm always interested, and I want to help people find a good solution for what they're dealing with too. So reach out to us, and we'll do our best to give you some advice.
Yeah. Bill Glanz, you can find his number online.
My number's on the website. My number's on the MDE website. I'm the contact guy. Yeah, for sure. Again, it's been that way since the start, and that number I could never change it because it's no. I'm happy. Yeah, it is, I suppose, but I could tell you in 13 years at virtual, and I've had the same number even before that. I've never once had a regret of giving out that number to any student or parent. Students or parents, I've never, maybe I'm just lucky or whatever, but I've never had anybody abuse that. I think people are generally really happy to be able to talk to a school administrator and find out some information. So,
I think that responsiveness and availability is really important. And I would say that's true for all of our programs. I think that's something that if you really want to talk to anybody, give them a call.
And not only that, but in many ways, I'm the decision maker on a lot of this stuff too. And so there again, if you're having a problem, or if a student or a parent in our school has something that this isn't working, you don't have to talk to a committee that is meeting next month, and
right.
that who knows, will maybe put you on the agenda. For a lot of almost all these, we created a system that should be able to be really responsive, and we don't have a sort of super hierarchy that has to sort of kind of filters everything through. in order to get issues resolved. If there's an issue resolved, generally it's me and whoever else I need to bring in to try to talk through and resolve those issues. And so, I mean, I literally do it every day. Did it this morning. Working through a couple of things that came across the plate today, and you just sort of get a couple people in the room and come up with something and work with the family to try to figure it out. So I think that's definitely our goal, and that's a point of emphasis for our school, is to make sure we are responsive when we need it.
You guys are great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
For all of you listening, I appreciate you tuning in and for your willingness to listen for understanding. That's what it's all about. So stay curious, ask more questions, and until next time, this is your host, Wendy Lorenz-Wallerman.